Welcome to Cincy Reformed Podcast. This is Pastor Brandon. I am the pastor of Christ Reformed Church, a URC church plant in northern Kentucky. And today we want to continue the story of discipleship, education, and catechesis, but this time examining Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, and the implications of that verse for us. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says, "And God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." This has been called by some the cultural mandate. For example, John Murray said, "For man there is the cultural mandate, coordinate with the dominion bestowed upon him." End quote. But note in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, there are three components of this cultural mandate. First is God's blessing. Second, the command to be fruitful, multiply. And finally, to have dominion over the created realm. William Edgar, commenting on that first component, the blessing, he said, God's blessing then is really at the heart of this cultural mandate and of all the successive iterations of it. Put differently, God enters into covenant relationship with his people. Everything else stems from that central arrangement. So Adam was prophet, priest, and king in the Temple Mountain of Eden. Cornelius Van Til put it like this: he was to be a prophet under God, seeking to know all that he could to the glory of God. He was to be a priest under God, to dedicate the development of all of his culture unto God. And he was to be king under God, to rule over all of human civilization to the glory of God. But what does the cultural mandate entail, put more broadly? Here, Herman Bavinck understood the cultural mandate as science and art, again conceived in its broadest form. Corey Brock and Gray Santato explain it like this: science is the work of inductive investigation, seeking to know. This occurs when from the smallest child to the most astute biologist. Art is the second operation in the cultural call, to know first and then organize. Art takes the knowledge of human experience and organizes it by subduing nature to the human will. To subdue the earth for Bavinck is to be a scientist and artist by way of knowing the world and then organizing it through reading, farming, biological theorizing, among a multitude of other possibilities. These operations must be done for a purpose, and thus all activity in the world either serves the purposes of God or not. End quote. So at the heart of the cultural mandate is man going out into the world to discover and to know. Proverbs 25:2, it is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. And not just to know, but also to organize that knowledge under God. William Edgar said that Christ fulfilled this cultural mandate, but that we follow Christ in this still. Edgar wrote, and I quote, "The cultural mandate is not simply accomplished by Jesus Christ, though he is the champion. He does this for us and with us. Christ has begun to subject all things to himself in this present age. All believers are identified with Christ's resurrection and therefore his rule. Believers are a kingdom of priests. Because believers are a kingdom of priests, they shall reign on the earth." Revelation 5:10, end quote. And what does it have to do, though, with education? Well, I think it actually has much to do with education. According to Cornelius Van Til, education is the implication into God's interpretation, which means that the pupil is learning to think God's thoughts after him, to dedicate the universe to its maker, and to be vice-regents of the ruler of all things, end quote. So notice here in Van Til, the very definition of education has the principles of the cultural mandate. Learning means to think God's thoughts after him, meaning that we need to be reinterpreters of God's original interpretation of all things, because God has created all things, He's given meaning to all things, He's interpreted all things, and we need then to discover God's meaning. We don't give facts of the universe a meaning. God has already given those facts a meaning. We need to discover that. And Van Til adds, to dedicate the universe to its maker, meaning that as you study the various academic disciplines in school, you are interpreting them according to God, dedicating them to God, seeing them correctly, and teaching them to others the correct interpretation of all things. And if you can do this, Van Til says, you are dedicating that piece of subject matter to God and for God. And so here again, the cultural mandate, conceived broadly as science and art, knowing and organizing, postures the pupil away from autonomy. We are not God. Our brains cannot give meaning and unite all the facts of the universe. No, God has already done that. Our job as students is to think God's thoughts after him, to dedicate the universe to its maker, to be vice-regents of the ruler of all things. And this is actually quite exciting. We get to discover how God does things. How did God, for example, structure the food chain in the animal kingdom? How did God get the moon to revolve? How did God uphold the various aspects of the universe? How is he doing it even still? We get to discover scientific and mathematical laws that are governing things, and the way in which God is upholding and doing things in and with the world. We get to discover that created world, to dedicate the universe to its maker, to show forth the proper interpretation of all things, not a false or twisted interpretation. Van Til said that while Christ fulfilled his cultural task, he said Christ enabled his own to follow him in this respect, albeit with great imperfection. Meaning that as we follow Christ in this cultural mandate, since we are united to Christ, we follow Christ, but even still, he says, we will not perfectly understand. There will be mystery, there will be ignorance, there will be imperfections. And that is okay. It is our task to pursue. It is our task to seek to understand, to seek to read the Word of God and look at the nature that God has created and see these things in harmony, to understand them properly according to the Word of God. Even though there is imperfection, it is of great joy to learn to see the world as it really is, and to watch Christ subdue all things to himself. And that reshapes how we think then about our catechesis, about education in general. So I hope that this has been a help to you as we think about discipleship and education. Next week, we will be stopping by Genesis chapter 2 to discuss the special creation of Adam, the task given to Adam. But until then, this is Pastor Brandon. Have a blessed day.